Well, we are leaving on an airplane very shortly, and we will be wearing masks or we're not allowed to fly. So I'll just wear my mask and rebreathe my carbon dioxide.
And as my sister says, it will make other people that are frightened less frightened, and that's important.
I was just asked the other day by someone new to us if I was the Forbidden Doctor. Well, of course, I said no. The Forbidden Doctor is not me at all.
We are not the Forbidden Doctor. Jack is not the Forbidden Doctor. It's in you.
The Forbidden Doctor is that magical, mystical power inside of you that is controlling and healing you.
It's that beautiful, marvelous, almost miraculous force that controls all healing.
It's that innate intelligence, that life force-directed influence that triggered your DNA to guide the building of your body after conception.
Yeah, it's that power that sustains your life, repairs your wounds and lesions, and it never stops working. It's that essential part of you that keeps you alive and heals your every hurt.
This is the Forbidden Doctor. It's not me. It's that part of you the powers that be have decreed forbidden to ever learn about or even consider, and never ever rely upon. For it is forbidden that you even know this life force exists at all.
You are your own Forbidden Doctor.
Yes. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jack.
And Mary.
And welcome back to the Forbidden Doctor podcast. This is podcast episode 203. So we wear masks until the end of time. Today we're going to talk about some forbidden stuff that is constantly kept from you by the major media for their own nefarious purposes. But it's in print, and it can be researched by the layman should he or she feel so inclined.
Yeah, we're not experts on these subjects, but we can read, and we know how to read scientific papers.
Yes, we do, and we do all the time. The average American relies so much on the evening news for his or her collective knowledge.
And just one station, usually.
Usually they just lock it, the one that makes them feel good about their beliefs. Mm-hmm. And because of that, their understanding of what's happening around them is kind of isolated to that one particular viewpoint, while completely ignoring what the scientists all over the world are saying that don't make the evening news.
Yeah.
And that might be of another bent than these fear-based reports that are designed to scare you to death into doing some of the most bizarre and scientifically ridiculous measures, such as the constant wearing of masks, well known to make you sick for a number of reasons, and yet there's still no double-blind studies anywhere proving masks or social distancing have any effect on reducing disease
or little kids
transmission.
Or little kids transmit disease to older people.
But Dr. Jack,
there's no studies whatsoever.
Yes, but Dr. Jack, when people wear masks and social distancing, the infectious rate went down.
Right.
There are other reasons. Yeah. There's a reason more powerful than that, than masks and social distancing, and we'll get to it in this podcast.
Yeah, we just assume these people know this because it does seem logical. You know,
does seem logical.
We're taking off on a trip pretty soon, and we got an email from Delta saying, all their information about COVID and everything. They sent this little clip. And I love the way we just assume it's true. Yep. We don't question anything. It says, medical research tells us that wearing a mask is one of the most effective ways to reduce COVID-19 infection rate. There is no site, there's no research, there's no little footnote or anything. It just says medical research tells us. No. You need to show us the medical research because
there's plenty of medical research that says exactly the opposite.
Yeah, there's plenty of that. Yeah. But they say there's medical research tells us, and it says that's why Delta remains committed to requiring customers and employees to wear a mask or face covering as a constant or consistent layer of protection across all Delta touch points. Oh, that's the new buzzword, touch points. You should only touch like 3 times before you get on a plane and then change those gloves and put new gloves on.
There was a time when it seemed logical that letting a certain amount of bad blood out of someone when they were sick would somehow lead to a healthier outcome. It made sense. It was logical. I mean, that's what killed George
Bloodletting?
Washington. Yes. They just let out too much blood trying to make him well.
Yeah.
You know,
it seemed logical. I mean,
well, at first glance, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, well, what's wrong with him? Well, his blood is bad.
He's got bad
What are we going
blood.
to do about it? Well, we're going to let some out, and then his body will make some fresh blood.
I mean, an exorcism.
That makes sense.
We need to get that bad spirit out of
That
you.
makes perfect sense. We'll
Yeah.
bleed him, bleed out the bad stuff, put in the good stuff. The average person assumes that the current understanding of COVID-19 comes from very rigorous scientific study. Nothing could be further from the truth.
What we're told.
And this is what we want to address in today's podcast. And then we will leave COVID-19 behind for a while, at least until the vaccines
I bet we
show up.
won't. But, you know, the scientists do know this. They know that passenger ship, the
The Princess, the Diamond
Princess, yeah, that had 3,700 people on it, and three got sick, and
like very
I mean,
few died.
and
It
that's
was
like
extremely
0.1%.
Yes, that
And
was a quarantined,
it was a
isolated
perfect
group.
experiment.
Extremely low infectious
And
fatality rate.
they knew we didn't have to use masks.
Yep,
they didn't
knew
have
then.
masks.
They weren't using masks.
No, not then.
No. Okay.
But before we get to that, we have some great news about our Forbidden Doctor website. Our website's called forbiddendoctor.com. Okay. We've opened up to the world our 700 plus symptom protocols. So, you know, you can just simply go to our website and go in the upper left corner and type in your symptom. You know, type in hair loss. We have a new hair loss protocol on there for male pattern baldness. So just go there, type in hair loss, and up pops a protocol. And if you want to save 20% on it, join our new $29 VIP membership, and you can get it for
There you go.
20% off. So you'll get free shipping over $100, and you're able to text Jack and I anytime. Day
Yes.
and night,
Yep.
24 hours a day. Can't say, well, answer you in the middle of the night, but you never know. We have before.
Yeah.
So join our $29 VIP membership and just go to forbiddendoctor.com/VIP, or on our homepage of our website, just click the little box there for the VIP membership to learn more.
All right, what we're going to talk about here is really very exciting. I mean, something that has been staring us, all of us actually, in the face.
It's a complete paradigm shift is what it
decades.
is. Yeah,
And we
it's
simply
actually
missed it.
been here, but it's just like all the other things we talked about that medicine used to do. Most of medicine has been wrong about so many things. I mean, the bloodletting, leeches, what was the
Thalidomide?
thalidomide,
Yeah, Baycol.
where they hurt
Celebrex.
babies. Yeah.
Using mercury and arsenic-based medicines up till about the 1930s.
And telling women not to nurse in
Oh,
the
yeah.
1950s. That
Yeah,
affected you?
Yeah, well, my mother didn't nurse
Didn't
me.
nurse,
Boy, that
yeah.
explains a lot.
Yeah, taking fat and animal foods out of our diet. But the big one.
Yes, the big one, the central delusion of our culture today.
We missed it for decades.
And it just shows how deeply ingrained in all of us this insidious myth of contagion really is.
Wow. Did you say myth?
The myth,
of
the
contagion?
myth of contagion. It hasn't been shown that this coronavirus is causing this current disease. The reason behind it is very, very simple. Now, you better sit down if you're listening to us right now, but I've talked about this on my radio show for several months.
Yeah,
We've talked about it in other podcasts.
We actually
No
have.
virus or bacteria has ever been shown to cause any disease. So there's no reason to expect that this coronavirus is going to be any different. The amount of deprogramming
Wow, for us even.
to realize this simple, well, that's what I was taught. I've been taught this since I was a
Always.
child. I was taught this in college. I was taught this in anatomy and physiology. I was taught this in bacteriology, histology,
And
communicable diseases, pathology.
Yeah, and-
I was taught this in every class.
And we were taught that we need to sterilize the gut if we get sick.
Yeah.
I mean, the insanity of it, it's like leeches. How could, I mean, it seems logical. We got a bad bug inside of us. We've got a boogeyman. We got to get away from it, or we got to kill it. We can't work in cooperation with it. Heavens.
No, because it's bad.
It's bad, and we get
We all
to...
know we all know germs cause disease, so wash your hands at every opportunity. Oh boy. The amount of deprogramming that it took for me, just myself, to simply realize this. But someone asked me that the other day in the clinic. What do you study? What do you read? What kind of books do you read? And I said, well, it's going to be very boring. Scientific reports. That's what I read, scientific reports.
Well,
and what is coming out now of the study of the virome is the simple fact of the matter is that this, in no case, in spite of over 150 years of trying, has anyone shown that either a purified bacteria or virus can cause any disease. It's simply not in nature's plan for this to be so.
Yeah.
Now, the
They
key
are not
word
the enemy.
is purified.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pure. You can take goop out of somebody and put that goop into somebody else and make them sick.
Mm-hmm.
But to purify it so that you can say exactly, bacteria A caused disease A has never, ever been proven.
And take that further. What makes them sick? If you do take goop out of somebody, are they really sick, or are they healthy enough to excrete?
To be sick.
Yes, to
which is
excrete
the
out.
excretion
Yes.
that appears as sickness.
See, we've got to change the
completely
way
backwards.
we're thinking.
Yeah, here's what. Now imagine you have milk, and the cow from that, the milk is the cow. Let's start off with the cow before we get to the milk. Is sick. It's very poorly fed. You can see the ribs.
It's not
It gets
taken
out
care
into a
of.
pasture and it's eating stuff in the grassy field out there that's not so grassy, that shouldn't be eaten. It's poorly taken care of. Exactly. And then you notice people that are drinking the milk from this cow suddenly have bad cases of diarrhea.
Yeah.
And maybe in some cases very severe bloody diarrhea.
Boy, that's an easy conclusion.
Yes, well, it must be a bug in the milk. And you go look and you get out your microscope and holy smoke, there's a bacteria there. And you look in your book, it's a Campylobacter.
Ooh.
Because it's well known that Campylobacter is a bacterium that can cause diarrhea in people.
They found the boogeyman.
There is another possible explanation for these. As I said, the cow was sick. It was poorly taken care of. It wasn't fed what a cow is supposed to be fed. Maybe even some poisoning. Maybe it got into an area of the field that ate some herbs or some weeds or something it shouldn't be eating, and it got poisoned. And we know that whatever poisons any mammal gets into their body and consuming it inevitably will show up in the milk.
That's why they say, when you're nursing, it will come right through the milk.
Be very careful you're doing when you what you eat when you nurse your baby, because it's going to be in the milk. Well, it's quite possible then that the Campylobacter that was present in the milk was not there as an infection, because in all nature, bacteria, one of the main reasons for bacteria, we're even using it in oceans now, special kinds of bacteria to break down the plastic bottles that that are accumulating as trash build up in the ocean. Bacteria biodegrade toxins and other debris.
Ooh, see?
Let me say that
They're
again.
the cleanup people.
They're the cleanup crew. Mm-hmm. Just like flies and rats will come to clean up a filthy alleyway, the viruses and the bacteria come to clean up the problem. So in other words, there's poisons in the milk, the Campylobacter bacteria, which are always present anyway in small quantities in the milk. But because there's some poisoning crap present in that milk, the Campylobacter loves poison crap in the milk. Their population flourishes. Mm-hmm. And the byproduct of the Campylobacter plus the poison gives the consumer diarrhea.
So rather than than being disease causing, the reality is the bacteria are remediating a bad situation.
Absolutely, you got it exactly.
Yeah. So it's the example we always give with Lyme disease, and it's yes, where they take a sample of their blood and they find the Borrelia burgdorferi in there. They also find horrible things, as we talked about in our Lyme disease. They find Epstein-Barr, they find Candida, they find it's not cyanide, they find all kinds of things, but they find an overproliferation of the Borrelia spirochete in there. Yeah. And so they say, now we can diagnose you with Lyme disease.
And so they load you up with doxycycline to further destroy the gut.
So they sterilize your gut when it is literally marshaling all the forces it can find that can
The
eat.
body is marshaling these forces.
Yes,
right?
and what are they eating? They're eating the glyphosate, the poisons, the heavy metals, the everything
They're
that you
cleaning up
have.
the debris.
They're cleaning everything up.
Yeah. Another example is the what they learned in Vietnam, and of course they've known this other places. Somebody gets damaged, they're hurt, whatever, lacerations, broken bones, whatever that pierce the skin, and they end up with gangrene.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't get to a medic soon enough.
So
What happens?
Yeah.
The flies show
Yep,
up.
they do.
And the flies start laying eggs in their tissue, and the maggots come out of the eggs, and they eat the diseased tissue, and when the maggots reach the healthy tissue, they fall off onto the ground.
But those maggots and the Borrelia spirochete and all of these different, I don't know what you want to call them, microbes inside of you, have their own excretions.
Yeah.
So they make you sick too.
Well, yeah,
So
if you get an
are-
overabundance.
So yes, I mean you got a pile of garbage inside of your body. You're sick. Same with the exosomes that we're going to get to and talk about. These viruses these exosomes that are saving our cells and cleaning up our cellular structure. They give the impression of being sick as you try to excrete them. And old people that have comorbidities have a hard time excreting these out.
Yep.
I always say, if you're healthy enough to excrete, your body will just handle it and get rid of it. If you can, the diarrhea, your liver can handle it, because that's usually what kills you in cancer, is an overwhelmed liver, that it just can't clean you out anymore. And so that can be really hard on somebody that has diabetes and heart disease and COPD and, everything.
You got it.
And obese and everything else that they have going on in their body. And then suddenly the body's like, I got to clean us out on a cellular level. But you just can't handle it. And
Well, I couldn't.
you
I
get
couldn't-
organ failure
I couldn't
and
say it better.
yeah.
So, as we pointed out, excuse me.
This is a different way of thinking.
Well, the first one is that the bugs cause the disease. The second way of thinking is that no, there's something else going on called being poisoned,
Yeah.
and the bugs show up to clean out the poison.
Ooh.
So I think the second explanation is much more in line with how nature operates. If you put you got a compost pile there in your backyard, or you do an annual garden, and you know about composting. So you
But
know.
if you mess up and put nasty stuff in that compost pile, yeah, I mean, you could grow certain bacteria and fungi.
Something starts growing on that compost pile you don't think is supposed to be there. Do you sit there and say, "Oh, it must be infected"?
My
The compost pile has an infection.
Yeah, it starts to smell,
Yeah.
on one side of it.
The microorganisms that are showing up right now are just fulfilling their normal role in nature. It just so happens they showed up at the scene of the crime, so they get the blame.
Yeah.
So it all boils down to this question, really. How do you prove which of these two explanations are correct? Is it the bacteria or the virus causing disease, or are they in some way fixing the problem?
The remediators.
And they're just being
Yeah.
blamed because, as I said, they're at the scene of the crime. Well, the answer to this question is very logical. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. All you have to do, as we said at the beginning of this thing, is isolate a pure culture, not a whole bunch of goop that comes out of the blood. You have to isolate a pure culture of either the bacteria or the virus, give it to the person the normal way it supposedly caused the disease. Like you breathed in a coronavirus, let's blow it up into the lungs and see what happens. This has been done famously by Louis Pasteur in experiments that were dating back, 150 years? And believe it or not, you better sit down again.
Yep.
As shocking as this may be for some of you to hear, not once was Pasteur ever able to transmit disease in this manner, nor has anyone ever been able to do so since. Pasteur said he did.
Yeah.
And that's where all the fanfare, and he got the big Heroes Award and all this kind of stuff by the French government.
But in his personal diary,
Yes.
that he said was never to be published, okay? He admitted he was never once able to transmit any disease in that manner.
Yeah.
He had to resort to putting poisons in his samples in order to prove the germ theory.
Oh, bad Louis. Bad
Yeah.
Louis.
But when he died, it said that his final words were, the germ theory is nothing, the terrain, the condition of the person or the poisons in the milk that we're giving that example is everything. And we talked about this, ad nauseum in our our seminal podcast 200.
Yes, the germ theory of disease is not true.
That germ theory of disease is not true.
I think that's when we lost half our listeners.
I think so.
But we encourage...
This is different. This is a different paradigm. And we have to start looking at this. Because what are we going to do? Wear masks forever? Run away from every new
Isolate
virus
forever,
and bag?
Have children go through
Did I
their
say
K
bag?
through the 12th grade experience with masks? So
can
we
you imagine?
encourage all of you to ponder this deeply. I mean, if we're correct, this changes everything. It's not a simple issue. I mean, and it would take an entire book, maybe volumes of books, to describe the ramifications of this kind of an understanding. But we've come to the conclusion, and if we don't begin to see nature as it is, that, as you say,
it works in cooperation. Yep.
And
Ooh.
instead persist in seeing the world through this delusion called the germ theory, we're going to be subjected to and will fall for more and more pandemics.
Yeah, this next one's, they last about 2 years.
Yeah, coronavirus lasts for 2 years.
What's the next one? We're just going to wear masks forever and ever and ever until the end of time? I'm sorry. I get so humiliated when I wear a mask. I feel stupid.
Well,
I feel like I have just surrendered. I mean, I feel like I stick out my arm and here, blood let me. I know it's ridiculous, but go ahead and do it.
Let some blood out so my thinking will clear up.
Yeah, so I can get on this plane.
Jeez.
If you let out some blood and, I'll feel better, I guess so. I got to prove and get on this plane. Here, let me give you some of my blood. Because it isn't a little thing to wear these masks. And I think we got into that last podcast, how it creates acidosis and people with lung problems.
And my last radio show was how masks make us stupid. And I often quote from scientific sources, but there are good scientific peer-reviewed double-blind studies in the world of psychology and psychiatry looking at a lot of different possible subjects, not just infectious bug problems, but mental problems. And they've done a lot of studies on what the effect of wearing masks, everything from Halloween masks to designer balls and things like this.
Those.
All the different things that where someone would wear a mask, even on a temporary basis, what it does to them psychologically. How and I on the radio show I was talking about how an experiment was done with kids having a bowl of Halloween candy on the step at the front of the house and a sign saying, take what you feel is fair. And they watched as kids wore masks, would grab handfuls. Kids that just had their faces painted a little bit only took 1 or 2 pieces. But the kids that came up with masks took a whole lot. The end of humanity was the idea of this study. And there's a lot of other stuff involved with it. But my point is, and we're going to get to this, it wasn't the masks and the social distancing that stopped the spread of this stuff. It's something else. Much more important. We'll get to that here before
Well,
we
and
go on.
then, I have to recognize the fear. My sister's always jumping all over me saying, people are scared, Mary, so wear it for them because they're so scared. And I want to just say, am I going to have to wear this forever? Because how are they going to get
helping them with their
unscared?
fear? Yeah, how do we unscare them? That is a much more sensible question. Well, through education.
We've got to wake up. We've got to wake up and realize we need to work in cooperation with nature and support and rebuild our bodies and stop polluting and poisoning our only home, our body.
Yeah.
Then a new dawn can come and we can create a world that will work for all of us, including our friends, our dear friends, the bacteria and the viruses.
So
we wouldn't be here but for them.
Yeah. Now, a little aside here and a little bit of a review that I would like to mention for a few moments is...
How did we get here, Jack?
Part of the... I'm trying to remember the movie that I'm thinking of at the moment, but there was this profound statement in a movie where one person kind of interrogating another person. The whole issue was to make sure you ask the right question. It's like the polling that's going on right now for the presidential race. And you hear the polls are doing this and the polls are doing that, and this person's catching up or this person's falling behind. And you don't know the questions that they're asking. It makes all the difference in the world what kind of a question the pollster is asking. So the first question is to ask when the medical community or the human race, or both for that matter, are confronted with a whole new set of symptoms, like they started last fall with this COVID thing. The question is, how do we know that this new set of symptoms is from an infectious disease? In other words, if you got a bunch of people who have the same symptoms in one place at the same time, well, that proves infection. See, that's the wrong question.
Yeah.
You know, how do you know this is an infection? Well, there's a whole bunch of people in the same area that come in contact. They breathe on one another, cough, spit, choke, puke, touch hands, hug, kiss, and they all have the same symptoms. So there's a bug there that caused
That's
this.
the first step in Koch's postulates, isn't
Well,
it?
yes, his postulates.
Yeah.
But, you know, let me...
I always say that wrong.
It's cute. Postulants. It's cute how you say that.
Pus.
So, but you know, we've talked about this before with the two great examples. In
Well, you think
1945,
about it, yeah.
the U.S. dropped a bomb on Hiroshima, and a half of people died from the same symptoms. That was clearly not an infection.
Right.
And then something similar, I think it was 1986 there in Chernobyl, an explosion, and then a kind of disease started to spread all across Europe. The Russians didn't come out and tell everybody what happened until, the Swedes, I think I was almost positive it was in Sweden, and their air tracking stations that, get the stuff out of the atmosphere. They say, hey, wait a second, this is nuclear material.
Yeah.
Someone set off a bomb somewhere.
They could even find the signature.
Weeks later. And the signature, they knew exactly, came from a series of nuclear power plants in, I think at the time, it was in, it was southwest of Moscow, but I think it was, it doesn't matter. But the fact is, because of the winds blowing southwest over through France and then up through New England, up through the British Isles, and then up towards Scandinavia, that circular wind pattern. And all of a sudden, the Swedes are saying, wait a second, this is...
As all viruses travel.
Yes. This
They didn't come on airplanes.
This is not a bug these people are having. They're having they're having radiation poisoning. People got sick, and some died. And so I think it'd be very easy for people to agree they were poisoned by radiation, not an infection. So some people say, well, but Dr. Jack, 3 people in my house got sick with this stuff, and they all had the same symptoms. There could be 100 different explanations for that. Maybe infection's one of them. My point is that the same symptoms in the same place at the same time are not scientific proof for an infection. So the question then becomes, well, how do you prove it is an infection? And you mentioned that here a minute ago with Koch's postulates. Robert Koch offered an answer to this late 1880s, I think, over a century ago. And he developed his postulates in the late part of the 19th century to determine whether a given microbe is the cause of a given disease. And so
I just remember the first one. The first one is that they all have the same symptoms.
Yeah, that everyone more or less has the same symptoms, and that any reasonable doctor would diagnose that illness based on those symptoms. And then the second postulate says that if you examine the blood of say 500 people who have those symptoms, 100% of them will grow out of their blood the meningococcus bacteria in their blood that they all seem to have. And I'm just using meningococcus as an example. Not 30 of them, not 80 of them, but all 99, not even 99, 100% of the whole 500 population you're looking at will have meningococcus. Otherwise, they don't have it. And it turns out that having meningococcus growing in your blood is not compatible with getting up and walking around. So postulate number 3 says that people who are up walking around are presumed to be fine. And so people with meningococcus growing in their blood don't walk around. So 0% of those up walking around with their normal symptoms, with no symptoms, do not have any meningococcus growing in their blood. And then finally, the 4th postulate says that if you take the meningococcus and purify it, You don't just take a blood sample. You don't just take a biopsy. You have to take the blood. You have to purify it. You put it in an animal. And 100% of the animals that you inject that into will get sick and will have the same symptoms. And if you then grow the meningococcus out of their blood and transfer it to another animal, the same thing happens, and on and on and on. And that's how Koch said, this is how you prove an infectious etiology, an infectious cause and effect.
But is it true? They've never been able to do that.
They haven't done that.
They've never done that.
When you go back and look at the original papers as to how the Chinese decided that it was this SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, the disease, what they did is they did a couple of terrible things with some monkeys. And they could not make the monkeys sick until they opened up their skull and poured in a cup of the goop into the brains of the monkey.
Which wasn't purified.
Was not purified at all. So you have to ask yourself, well then, and then one of the monkeys died and the other one got violently sick. Well, if someone opened up your skull and poured in a cup of goop, you're going to get violently sick or die yourself
cleaning
too.
yourself out real fast.
But because they found that virus in the goop, we have the room, we have the weapon, and it's Miss Scarlet. And so we know exactly who committed the murder. And so what is a virus? Well, a virus is a piece of DNA or RNA, a few other proteins encapsulated in a capsule made out of your own cellular material. And a virus is a billionth of a centimeter. You can imagine $1 billion. In our national debt, $1 billion is nothing anymore. It just, it's 1,000 million. But a billionth of a centimeter. Now, there's 2.5 centimeters in an inch. So you can put 1 billion of these. Now, let me give you a good example here. If humans were the size of a virus, we took the entire population of the planet.
This is how tiny a virus is.
This is how tiny a virus is. 7 billion people are on this planet. If you took all 7 billion of these people and like Ant-Man, took them down to the size of a virus, all the Earth's population lined up, one after another, would be less than 3.5 inches long.
That's how tiny.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the middle finger of my left hand. That's about 3 inches long.
Yeah.
The entire human population lined up would be about that long if we were the size of a virus.
And we think these masks with gaping holes in the sides and
that's hilarious.
They won't even stop dust.
And you're talking about the face diaper, the blue one that looks like a diaper.
Yeah, just all of them. It's so humiliating. I even have a cloth one I put on and falls down, and I feel like a third grader. I feel like I have to obey my teacher, even though I know it's a terrible thing she's making me do. I have to obey her.
Yeah.
I'm so embarrassed.
So you look at the fact the viruses are so small, they couldn't see them until about the 1930s when they had the electron microscope. And here, you look at a very common viral disease like chickenpox, and more or less everybody with chickenpox would have the same set of symptoms. They'd have
blisters,
fever, feeling crummy, not terribly horrible, but just feeling crappy. Yeah, and then they get these little blisters.
Chickenpox don't kill you.
Then after 7 to 10 days, the person's better.
Especially kids.
Yeah, and 100% of all these people will literally have millions of copies of this chickenpox virus in their blood, and they're going to have thousands, maybe millions of it in every one of the little blisters that's on their body. And if you apply Koch's postulates to the chickenpox virus, the steps would involve getting a purified culture of that virus. You expose an animal, you produce the chickenpox symptoms, you obtain more chickenpox virus from the animal, purify that, expose it to the next animal, and you can prove that the chickenpox virus caused the chickenpox. And that's what should have happened.
But they didn't.
In this coronavirus situation. As far as I know, it hasn't. I mean, I've read the studies. First, there's no particularly characteristic symptoms. People may have a low-grade fever and a dry cough. Lots of people. Mm-hmm. People have the flu. People have a cold, asthma, a reaction to air pollution can have low-grade fevers and dry coughs.
Yes, and when do kids get this? At a certain time, at a certain age. They go through all of this. And
why don't they get chickenpox when they're 21? Why do they get chickenpox before puberty? Why do they get measles before puberty? Why do they get rubella before puberty? Why do they get the mumps before puberty? I'm
It's-
playing up on your line.
I know. It's a viral upgrade. I mean, it is an actual maturing, we don't know thing that we go through. And Jack's going to get ready to tell you something that's really amazing about why we only get chickenpox and we don't get chickenpox and mumps and measles all at the
Well,
same
I think
time.
it plays right into what you're saying. Now, I got all three of the biggies, chickenpox, measles, and mumps, within about a 2-year period, living in the same geographical area, which means the viruses that would cause those are all present. Why didn't I get all three of them at once? Why doesn't anybody get all of them at once? Why do people only get one viral disease at a time?
We don't
See, now
know.
yeah,
We
I know,
don't
we
know.
don't. And that's why I'm saying you have to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
The right question isn't what caused this disease. Well, we found the COVID virus is in his blood. It must be COVID.
Yeah.
That is not the right question.
The rats are the cause of the mess.
That's right.
Of the garbage.
The flies are causing the garbage in the
and
backyard.
it's just not true.
Yeah.
We know that, but we don't know why some of these things happen. That's what we need to jump in.
The Chinese came out and said, hey, this is a little different kind of a dry cough. It's a different kind of a low-grade fever. And knowing how you might feel about infectivity, you might reasonably assume that scientists examined the blood of these, say, 500 people and demonstrated they all had millions of copies of this new coronavirus in their blood.
Didn't do that.
No, they didn't. And they didn't do it with 500. They didn't do it with 100. They didn't do it with 10 people.
Mm-mm.
I'm not sure it even happened with anybody. Instead, they took people's respiratory sputum, work up a spit there, buddy, and examined it under an electron microscope. But if you look at someone's respiratory secretions, there's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen the pictures. You can go to Google, google.com, and go to the images and put in virus.
There's tons.
And, oh, my goodness, the incredible
Well,
pictures of
Dr.
viruses.
Zach Moss talks about this, how they had that huge study, 8,700 people or something, and they said they found HIV, but nobody's exhibiting.
Well, it gets down to amplification.
Yes.
That's what I want to get to here.
That's the Koch's postulate.
That's what's wrong with the PCR tests.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is the PCR test.
I'm getting a little ahead of myself.
Okay.
But, and so, there's all, when they look at it under the microscope, there's viruses, there's debris, there's proteins, and they essentially looked at the coronavirus under a microscope and said, well, this has different genetic material than what what we've seen before. And knowing that the genetic material of a coronavirus is an RNA, not a DNA, and they said, well, we think it's a new one. Well, fair enough. I mean, they may have seen a new one. In fact, they probably did, but they didn't demonstrate that this new virus is present in millions of copies in everybody who has the same disease.
Now, yeah.
That would be the only way you could prove that this is what caused the disease.
And I love that analogy of the milk. If we go look in our blood, and if we go and people that get diagnosed with Lyme disease, I mean, these things are always in us, as Dr. McBride is always saying. All of these pathogens, all of these bacteria and candida and everything, and they just proliferate when they get fed, like when we eat a lot of sugar, or when we get poisoned. Then they come out and say, danger, Will Robinson, we got to clean out these cells.
Yeah.
And
That's very good. That's a very good point. Because if I were a disease investigator, playing up on what you just said, I would next have said, all right, show me 500 symptom-free people of approximately the same age and the same health status as these people who you say are sick. In other words, you have to have a group that is similar to the 500 people who are sick, not 500 comorbid people, but 500 people of relatively the same age, the same sex, the same environmental areas, but they're not sick. And then we would take blood samples, sero blood samples of all these 500 people, and not a single one of them, according to Koch's postulates, would have this COVID virus present inside of their bodies. Now, as far as I know, not only was that not done with 500, it wasn't done with 100 or even 10, as I said.
I'm still stuck back
I don't think it was done with anybody.
Finding 500 people with no comorbidities.
Well, I'm not talking about the United States. Talking about China.
Even children.
And I've read
sad.
the original articles. You know what? I made a mistake. When I said the original articles, I was talking about the monkeys, and that was polio.
Yeah, I was going to say
right.
something, but it kind of worked.
I got confused there for a second. That's polio. I'm going to get to polio here in a second. I got a little ahead
They
of myself
opened up
on
the
that.
monkey's brains and poured in a half a cup of
What they did is
pus
they took
and
from a paralyzed child part of his spinal cord.
they did.
And they ground it up, and they mixed it up, and they poured it in on the skull of a monkey, and the monkey did not get it. It got violently sick and died. The other one got violently sick but didn't get polio. But that's a whole. I think we've done a podcast on that.
No, the one got sick and died. The other one got paralyzed, and they held that one up.
That's right.
They showed pictures of
You're
it
right.
of this monkey. Who wouldn't?
Headline
whose
newspapers.
nervous system wouldn't get paralyzed?
If you had that crap poured into your skull.
Throwing that in, and who knows what it was, the polio virus, or was it all the other poisons that were thrown in? Who knows? I mean, the moral of the story is stupid. The moral of the story is, if you're a monkey, run
for your life.
I mean, that's the only
Well, let me get
conclusion you
back.
can come from that ridiculous study. And didn't they
Excellent point.
I thought they used hundreds and hundreds of monkeys.
Well, there was one article that indicated they used up to 500,000 monkeys during the polio research
And they
period.
got one?
And they never once were able to prove the polio virus caused the polio.
Yeah, that it was contagious.
Yeah, that it was contagious.
Just
even
like
that
today.
Even that it was contagious.
Yeah, and here we are 150 years later, and we're just going round and round and round, and now we're putting masks on and isolating and living in bubbles.
Over something they haven't even proved yet. They've just assumed.
I feel so
and the
stupid.
average American, the
Every
average
time.
Canadian,
Yeah.
UK, European, South American, Oriental, whatever, wherever their countries are, running scared to death because somebody said, run for your life. Now, I've read the original articles, as I was talking about here a few moments ago, back in January, postulating that this coronavirus was a new infection. And the articles actually come out and say, we did not attempt to purify the virus.
I just can't.
They said that we didn't try to purify it. Well, they can't purify it because they found too many people with symptoms that did not have the virus, and they found way too many people with the virus who didn't have any of the symptoms. So when you have that kind of an inconsistency,
that's
you
the
can't
word.
say this caused that. So it means they took the respiratory secretions containing the new virus, also possibly 10 or million other viruses, a whole lot of stuff. They injected it down the throat or in the nose of some animals. Some of the animals, not all, got sick. Most of them didn't. In fact, one of the studies, they couldn't get normal mice sick, so they used what they call wild mice.
They're genetically modified.
So they used genetically defective mice, and those mice got sick when injected with this unpurified snot. And that does not sound like proof to me. It's just like cancer studies that they do with rats. The only way that they can get cancer to grow in a rat to study the cancer is to feed the rat
Sugar.
the standard American diet, which is mostly pure overprocessed grains and sugar.
And it's liquid high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah. Yes, and you feed the rat that food for about 6 weeks, then it will succumb to cancer. But if it's fed a natural, normal rat diet, they don't get cancer. And of course, that doesn't make the evening news. So let me give you another example here, and I'm going to try. This is 40 minutes. I didn't want it to go too long, but I wanted to give you another good one here, and that's from Virus Mania. And I've talked about this book before. It's a very incredibly heavily documented book.
Yeah, they're Germans. They're smart.
Yeah.
It's translated.
And what they talk about in the late 1800s, a new disease involving paralysis of the limbs started showing up, particularly in children, sometimes in adults, but mostly children. And nobody knew what it was. But at the same time the disease showed up, people started spraying their orchards with a chemical called lead arsenic, or lead arsenate.
Okay, so that's horrible. It's terrible. And it makes sense. And it's like their body tried to clean it up, but it damaged their nervous system.
Well, yeah, the poison, the lead.
Yeah.
They knew that. Well, they didn't know at the time, but they know now. Lead is a terrible neuropositive or a neurotoxic poison.
So they became
Look
paralyzed.
at the lead pipes up in Flint, Michigan, and all the problems that has caused downstream. So when the scientists did the pathology exams and the autopsy, they found that a certain portion of the nervous system, in the gray matter of the interior of your cord, you have the anterior horn and the posterior horn. And I remember the very first day in school when we started learning about this, because it looks like the Honda logo.
Oh,
you know, the kind
yeah.
of the H-shaped line. It looks like the gray matter of the lower part of the spinal cord. And the 2 points at the top of the H are the anterior horn. The bottom part of the H is posterior. The anterior part is the motor control, especially for the lower extremities, the further down the cord. The back part is the sensory. So the interesting thing about polio is that they could get a child who they could stick a pin in his foot and he'd jump and yell because the posterior horn was okay, but he couldn't move his
walk.
leg because the anterior horn was poisoned. And so that's the stuff they took and put in the monkey, the ground up part of the anterior horn of a paralyzed child or an autopsied cord from someone who had died. And the interesting thing about this is that they could put that stuff, unless they seriously poisoned the monkey, they could not give the monkey polio. Now, let me go on because we know that lead arsenic is a specific toxin for that part of the nervous system. But and this was in the heyday. This was going on in the late 1800s, the heyday of Pasteur's germ theory. And so they said, well, it has to be an infection.
Yeah.
So someone came along and said, well, let's call it polio. But because they couldn't find a bacteria in either the polio cases or people without polio, they decided, well, it must be something smaller than a bacteria. However, you know, this is prior to the invention of the microscope or the electron microscope. So they had to take the whole goop because they couldn't isolate the particular viral entity because they didn't know there was one until they suspected there was something there. But until they had the electron microscope, they just didn't know. So I kind of want to jump, try to move towards some kind of a conclusion here because the polio story illustrates a big fork in the road because the scientists essentially say, well, we know it's an infection, but we can't find it. So we got one of two choices. Either we acknowledge that we can't prove it or we change the rules of the game.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. They changed the rules of engagement. And so they said, well, Koch's postulates do not work with a virus. And when you take out that aspect of virology where you can prove infectious cause by a purified sample, then it's a guessing game after that. Yeah. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why is this going on out there? What's really going on out there? And then, you know, the PCR test, and we've talked about that in podcasts as well. I mean, even the author of the PCR test, Carrie Mullis, who was able to, he developed the PCR test.
But tell them what that is.
Well, it's the reverse transcriptase test where you compare a serological sample or a snot sample or whatever else against a gold standard. Mm-hmm. A gold standard would be established by Koch's postulates,
which they
where
don't
you
do.
proved within a shadow of a doubt that this virus causes COVID-19. They never did that. They don't have something to compare it to. So they end up, and then viruses are so tiny, you can't just take a snot sample and look at it and say, under an electron microscope, which is impractical, you can't put those set up at all the testing stations. So they look for certain RNA signatures. But all coronaviruses have RNA signatures. Mm-hmm. That's why they're claiming there's so many false positives, because the virus is so small, they have to amplify the sample. And so what they found out is that when they would amplify the sample in special protein baths to create a greater number of these things, they multiply it 30 times, and they look at it under the microscope, and there's nothing there. They amplify it 35 times, and they start to get an inkling of it. They amplify it 40 times, and everything is there. HIV, hepatitis C.
Everybody's sick.
Everything, every virus known to man is in our bodies. But they're at such lower levels until they amplify it, which isn't exactly following the rules and laws of nature. Until they amplify it that high, they can't see it. So what they do is they have to say, well, we have to go above 35, but if we go above 37 amplifications, we're going to end up with all these other things. And there's no way to standardize the way they amplify these tests from country to country, to test. And so you end up with so many false positives. Now, suppose you only had a false positive of 1%, which means out of 100 people sampled, only one of them was wrong. You test 30 million people, 1% is 300,000, and you have a pandemic.
Wow.
That's part of what's going on. It's not all of what's going on. That's part of what's going on. And so you have to start looking at, you set the number of cycles, like I said, let's say you set it at 37, 38, 39 cycles. And then you end up with you go up one more cycle and everybody's sick. Suddenly you have
a pandemic.
You have a pandemic. Suddenly you have hundreds of thousands of people. What is it now in 180,000 deaths or something like that? That's a different matter because now there's all kinds of evidence indicating, even the CDC is coming out saying, well, a lot of them just died with COVID.
Only 96%.
Not because of it.
Yeah. So
now I just I want to turn to what is a cause and what is a virus, because I was saying at the very beginning of this thing, we want to say that the fall off of the disease is because we started doing social distancing and wearing masks, which seems logical. I mean, I'm not going to argue that. But I want to refer to some health professionals and medical doctors, in particular, to a lecture given by one of the most prominent virologists in the world. Mm-hmm. His nickname Skip. Herbert W. Virgin IV, MD, PhD. You can find him on YouTube and on the National Institutes of Health website. And he gave the National Institutes of Health 2015 annual R.E. Dyer lecture on the state of infectious diseases. Now, I want to point out that when I was in chiropractic college, which for the unlearned out there, no offense, is 10 semesters. I mean, it's not a weekend course. We didn't know anything about the gut. We weren't taught. This is like 30 years, more than 30 years ago when we started this stuff. We didn't know anything about the microbiome. That bacteria live in our gut and everywhere in our body. I mean, back then bacteria was bad, germs were bad. So what do you do when you find out people have germs floating around the bloodstream or in their lungs? Yeah, kill them.
You pull out the the sanitizing stuff. Those were almost off the market before this pandemic happened. Yep. I mean, we knew we can't live in a sterile world. We're finally beginning to recognize the microbiome, and those antibacterial soaps, you couldn't even find them in the stores.
Yep.
Because they're so bad for our health. And of course, now I just cry because they're everywhere.
Oh yeah.
And we're just killing bacteria. We're not killing viruses with them, and it's killing 99% of them. What's it not killing? It's leaving open the very virulent, horrible bacteria. Doesn't kill them. It doesn't kill viruses because viruses aren't even alive. I mean,
good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's insanity. We're going around wiping off all the tables, cleaning everything, and we're moving into a sterile world. So the only thing left are the really horrible bugs that those antibacterial wipes can't kill, and we're just sitting ducks. We don't have the balance.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
So Dr. Virgin, in this talk that I'm referring to, says that we have millions of, this is only 5 years ago. And this is where the whole idea of the virome comes from, the microbiome accelerated after this, that he said that we have millions of viruses in our virome, millions of viruses that live inside of our body.
And every orifice of our body, in our blood and in our cells.
Millions of different viruses, exactly. And in fact, it's very difficult, he said, sometimes to know what is a virus and what isn't. Well, and he goes on to describe viruses as messengers.
I love that.
And you talked about this earlier, that he said that their rapid response team, if you encounter danger, your body essentially liberates a piece of its own genetic material.
There you go, the exosome.
The exosome, which is where the RNA signature is coming from. And they go out to other cells and tissues, and they send this message saying, I've been poisoned. Something bad has happened to me. And it's very similar to what a tree does. If a tree in a forest gets eaten by beetles, it sends out these, there's studies on this where they send out these messages root to root. And so that the other trees can begin these immunological reactions against the beetle. And it's a natural way that we protect ourselves, and how our cells communicate between themselves and the tissues and the organisms, even how a species can communicate with another species. The touching that goes on between cats to cats and dogs to dogs.
We
and
don't touch
horses
anymore.
to horses.
We're isolated.
Their bodies are communicating
Yeah.
with them, and they pass on their virome. They pass on their microbiome, because we simply ignore this aspect of our physiology at a terrible penalty.
Yeah.
Dr. McBride, at our peril.
At our peril,
We
that's
ignore
what
these
she
things
says.
at our peril. And so the DNA, the genetic material is encapsulated inside these cells. When something disturbs it, the DNA changes, and they talk about how this COVID thing changes the DNA structure, and it makes new genetic material. It gets packaged up. It gets sends out as to other organisms, that we spread the COVID to other organisms, not in an infectious sense,
Right.
but
a
in a
danger.
sense of, hey, there's something happening here. That's what we call viruses.
And this just kills me, because Hawaii's completely cut themselves off from the rest of the world, and they're just putting off the inevitable. So they've just prolonged the inevitable. I mean,
Yes.
they're running from something that will never go away. That COVID-19 is not, the coronavirus is not going to go away. And I don't know what they're thinking. You have to take that to the logical conclusion, and there's no way to get away from this. It's insanity.
So we have to change our understanding of what the virus is.
That's right.
Is it a virus of a disease and causes disease, or is it something else? And that's what this Dr. Virgin is talking about 5 years ago at the NIH. And he says, here I'm quoting, something's happening here. This is what we call viruses. That's why it looks like a contagion. The body is sending out this signal. It's sending out a message.
That's what he's saying.
That's right. He said
the body's sending out a message to another organism that something's
or to
happened.
another organ in the body.
Well, there's that
or
too,
to another
yeah.
group of cells, or into the blood, or to the brain. Warning.
But I like the people part. I like that another person is sending a warning out. You need to get off sugar. You need to start building your immune system. You need to start thinking correctly. You need to get rid of fear and hatred and all these other things. We have got to do something. As Zach Bush says, we're in an
If we don't,
extinction
in the next
level
10 years,
event.
yeah, this is an existential event going on right now.
He says 9 years.
Now this is getting into what I said at the beginning. It wasn't putting on the masks and social distancing that stopped the spread of this thing. We're approaching that. We'll get to it here in a few minutes. But it's what Zach Bush is saying. If something isn't done in the realm of what I'm hinting at here, we won't be here in 2050.
That's what he said.
We will not make it. We will not make it. It is an
And
extinction.
we've got to stop our thinking and change our thinking, I should say, about these viruses. I mean, they're dead. The theory of a virus is that it's wily.
Well, that's it. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about viruses being.
You're just going around.
I'm going to get you now.
You're just minding your own business, and this virus attacks you, and it makes millions of copies of itself inside of you. Well, it doesn't do it, but the body does it, and then you're sick. I mean, that's the theory. Over the last 40 years, you have to ask yourself, which part of it is wily?
Which part of that RNA
It's thinking-
segment inside that virus is the wily part?
It's thinking, I'm going to escape detection. I'm going to go to Hawaii because it's not going to happen there.
let's use, and you said it's here to stay. I like that. Let's consider 5 viral diseases. As I want to
we
wrap
think
this
of
up.
them,
I want
yes.
to wrap this up pretty close. Chickenpox, measles, German measles, mumps, and hand, foot, and mouth disease. There's 5 of them right there.
Yeah.
The classic viral diseases. Everybody's heard about these things, and that before the 1950s, they attacked
These wily
millions
viruses.
of people who then got the symptoms. Here's a question, and I'm going to ask it of our listening audience. You already asked me a minute ago. Have you heard of anybody having all 5 of those at the same time?
Yeah. No. What's going on?
Or 2, or even yeah. As far as I know, I've never seen it reported anywhere.
So there's 2 possible explanations, and only one of these is true. Okay. First, there's something really wrong with the virus theory.
Yeah.
Okay. That's That's the true one. I'm just going to give you a hint. That's the true one. There's something really wrong with the virus theory. And the second, and it's impossible, is that the last 200 years, not once has a human being been exposed to 2 viruses at the same time.
This is profound.
Mm-hmm.
This is how can no one have chickenpox and measles at the same time?
Nobody's ever thought of this.
Because the chickenpox virus and the measles virus are all over the place.
Yeah, all the time. In Hawaii, too. They're there. They can't get away from it.
Well, they'll say like illnesses like chickenpox and measles attack largely the same tissue, but what about mumps? I mean, mumps attacks the parotid gland. So why couldn't one virus attack your parotid and another one your respiratory and another one your skin and another one the breast and another one the brain? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
I think the body is smart, and it just cleans out one thing at a time at a certain age also, and at a certain season, and at the perfect time. That's my theory, because we don't know. We don't know why 2 different viruses don't attack at the same time.
Because
I think
the body is sending a single message at a time.
It knows you can't handle it.
Let's go back to the virus as a messenger.
I think
people are poisoned. Something poisoned the body, and we're going to get to that here in our conclusion.
And there's a certain virus that will clean that up.
Yeah, exactly. And the body sends out a distress signal because, excuse me, we're living in a unified system. We're a living, breathing, crystalline structure, and the response is, I've been poisoned. I'm going to send out the signal to my friends and relatives in this world that's going to alert them so they can start an immunological response
Could be.
to what I've been exposed to.
Yeah.
And so why does this happen to everybody? I mean, in the past, every child got chickenpox.
But then they never got him again.
Yeah, and then all children need to go through a certain elimination phenomena, as you were talking about earlier, like this messenger phenomenon to become healthy. In other words, it's part of their maturation process. And here's the message that gets passed along.
And why? This has got to make them more healthy because they have less glioblastoma and less arthritis if they've gotten chickenpox.
Exactly. They've done studies, long-term studies, 10, 20, 30, 40-year studies. And there are studies that show that children who were naturally exposed to some of these so-called viral diseases early in the childhood, as they matured, had a less incidence of problems with worse contagion, worse diseases down the road. And you use the examples of glioblastoma in the brain and
That's
arthritis.
why we have 54% of our children have chronic diseases,
Right.
wherein when you were born,
It was 2%.
it was 1.2.
1.2%, I think it was.
1.2%.
Yeah, back in the 50s when I was a little guy, about 1.2%. Now it's 52.4% of
Wow.
all children in America have some chronic condition because of the poisoning.
Yeah, the vaccines, and we think these parents in their 20s think that the chickenpox will kill their child, and it's a viral upgrade.
So this explains why diseases look contagious. What
Yeah.
we've been talking about here. I mean, it perfectly explains all the observable phenomena of the history of viral disease. So
There's layers and
what's
layers
going
and
on?
layers to this that we could discover on this podcast. I mean, we could go on for a long time talking about the different layers.
So yes, Mary, we could go deeper and deeper, but let me just add one last idea here.
Okay.
Why did, when they started doing the lockdowns, and although some places didn't do lockdowns,
I
like
know.
Sweden, South
Like
Dakota, had very low infectious rates.
I'm going to move to South Dakota.
Yeah. Why, when we started wearing masks, started practicing social distancing, quarantining, all this stuff, did the rates start to go down? Well,
I think the pollution went down.
well, that's it.
Yeah.
Because I'm saying
We ate
that
at
it's
home, we
something
didn't eat in
that is
restaurants.
poisoning us, that is causing the DNA degradation, which is being seen as some new virus. Now, the question is, what's the toxic influence that's hurting us? Now, I'm not a toxicologist. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a virologist. I'm an upper cervical chiropractor, but I know how to read research. And we know that people are having an immunological reaction to what's going on. They have a cough. Some of them even having hemorrhages and bleeding in their lungs. And now they're even blaming heart attacks on this. And what is happening to the people's lungs that's creating this new toxic insult? Now that we can look back over our shoulders and get a little perspective of what's going on, look at Wuhan. First of all, Wuhan is one of the world's most polluted cities. I mean, you can barely see the ground. And then they hyper-vaccinated the people in Wuhan in the weeks and the months before all of this stuff started. In other words, they're shooting residents full of metallic aluminum. Even though it's nanoparticles, it's still metallic aluminum.
Which their body will want to get rid of.
And which, by the way, causes an immunological reaction, a cytokine storm.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of putting mercury in a vaccine. The purpose of putting aluminum in a vaccine is to create this cytokine storm, hopefully under a controlled threshold so that they don't go into a full cytokine storm and it kills them. Mm-hmm. Although many people have done that. And that's what we're told is happening with this COVID thing in this current epidemic is cytokine storms. Well, you get a cytokine storm when you inject aluminum, and there's also aluminum and all other kinds of toxins in the air.
Glyphosate's in the air and in our water.
Because of the biodiesel diesel in New York.
That's right.
New York has the highest level of biodiesel consumption by public vehicles in the city of New York.
Law.
And that biodiesel is coming from glyphosate-poisoned plants.
Corn.
The glyphosate goes through the biodiesel process. It's oxidized to some degree by the combustion, and the atmosphere fills up with this stuff, plus the particulate matter that's associated with it that you see heavy amounts in Wuhan. And then, of course, there's other kinds of poisons that are taking up. And, the same thing happened in northern Italy.
Yeah, electromagnetic fields.
The electromagnetic fields that are growing all over the planet. And we know that electromagnetic fields will cause degradation of the genetic material inside of our cells, leading to even further problems. So my point is this. These people are getting DNA damage. And why did, in Wuhan, where we had the first thing fully break out, why did Wuhan suddenly start getting better when they practiced social distancing and they practiced masking and quarantining?
What was causing the pollution stopped.
The air cleaned up.
Their air cleaned up.
All of a sudden, there was no more COVID.
Yeah.
So they come back out and they go back to work. The air fills back up with this particulate matter again, and they start talking about the second wave of COVID.
The body hadn't finished cleansing.
When air patterns over certain areas of the planet where there was heavy COVID changed, and the summer winds started showing up, the disease started disappearing. In America, they tried to compare what was going on in America with several countries in Europe. But you can't do that because America is so huge. And you have a northern latitude part of the country, you have a southern latitude, and they found out that north of the 35th parallel, the COVID experience was completely different than what was going on south.
It's like two different countries.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. It's like two different countries. And what was happening in the atmosphere, what was happening in the food, the stuff that's being harvested, the glyphosate poisoning, the particulate matter from nearby industries, the DNA damage that is being caused by the poisoning of the body is what is causing the exosomal release of our own genetic material into the nearby tissues and the nearby fluids and the lymph that is being seen under an electron microscope as a virus. And I agree with what Dr. Virgin said 5 years ago when he released all this information to the NIH. These things are messengers. They're not the cause of the problem. They're a messenger of a worse problem.
Yeah.
And the problem that is killing people right now, that's causing the presence of this virus, is the poisoning of the planet.
And that's the message it's sending to other people. You can think of it as an infection of sorts, like my body's giving this other body a message saying, guys, we got to get together. We got to figure this out. We got to build our bodies, or we got to clean up the planet. We got to clean up what we eat. We can't just wear masks forever. We just can't do that. It's not sustainable. It's crazy. So it's very profound that it's not social distancing. It's not mass. It's not shutting down all air travel and sheltering at home and living in bubbles. In fact, that will prolong. It will prolong us from ever achieving true herd immunity.
Yes.
Okay? This virus isn't going anywhere. What we need to do is get rid of the cause for its abundant presence. The pollution in our body, our food, air and water, glyphosate in our food, water and air, aluminum, mercury, chemicals in our vaccines, the possible 5G poisoning that experts are warning us about. The virus and bacteria are here to clean us up.
I believe that.
Not kill us.
If they were here to kill us, they would have killed us a long time ago.
That's what we say about the germ disease. If the germ disease were
virologists,
true, nobody would be left alive to believe
that's
it.
true. And virologists tell us anywhere from 20 to 50% of our DNA is virus.
Yeah.
Now, let me say that again.
Okay.
20 to 50% of our DNA is virus. We know that it only takes a little over 10% of our entire DNA structure to make us. The human genome is only 20,000 genes. The fruit fly has 50,000 genes. Humans have 20,000 genes. It only takes 20% of our DNA. What's that other 80%? Well, we know 20 to 50% of that DNA is viral DNA.
Yeah.
What's that doing in there? How did it get in there? How long
It's
has
not
it
the
been
enemy.
in there? It's a part of life.
Yeah.
There's a study out of Harvard that mapped the air pollution quality in the areas of high mortality related to COVID, and it showed that for every one particle per cubic meter, that's called PM 2.5, particulate matter of 2.5 microns, for every increase in that level by 1 microgram, there's a 10 to 15% risk of death. In other words, so what's that mean? That means in the areas that have high particulate matter in the atmosphere are going to have a higher death rate from what appears to be a respiratory viral killer, which they're trying to say coronavirus is.
Yeah.
But coronavirus, look at what you're having more like hypoxia. We were told that back in February. That Dr. Kyle Seidel, I think, is something like that.
That was his name. Yeah.
He comes out and he says, hey, these people aren't dying of respiratory infections. They're dying of hypoxia. And so with hypoxia, it's like cyanide type of poisoning. And so, there's a whole paradigm shift that's going on right here, right now. Could the virus be cleaning us up? Because, of course, we've had viral transmission around the globe before we developed air travel. I mean, we're not going to eliminate the virus by stopping air travel.
Yeah.
That's silly.
Yeah.
A really cool study, looking at Spain recently demonstrated that you could...
Pain, too. I mean, there's a lot of pain in this
You'll
whole
find the same
podcast.
bioparticles in the ice caps. Nearly at the same time, they found the virus in desert systems all around Europe.
Yeah. So, if you look all across Europe, all the vastly different ecosystems, most of them are uninhabited by humans, and they're showing viruses showing up simultaneously.
Yeah, they have So about 3 weeks after the first people from China landed in Europe, within 3 weeks, they found the virus in the ice caps. They found it in the deserts. They found this virus everywhere with no means to explain the transmission except the wind. The wind brought it.
As it
the
always
jet
has.
stream brought it.
And Hawaii's going to get it too.
In the air between us right now, and we're sitting 3-4 feet apart, there is trillions of viruses floating around in the air right now.
Yeah.
Trillions of them. And remember, they are so small that if humans were reduced to the size of a virus, lined up one after another, the line would be 3.5 inches long.
Sounds like they could get through a mask. So do we wear masks until the end of time, really? We run and hide and live in fear? Or do we build our foundational structure and live in peace with the environment? We can't run away from viruses forever. They're here to stay. This is a viral upgrade. These strands of RNA, these exosome detox, they're saving our cell structure. That's what they're doing. We should be grateful for it. We should work in cooperation with it, as Dr. McBride says. Nature always works in cooperation. We humans, we aware humans, need to start working in cooperation. It hasn't even been proven to be contagious.
Not yet.
Let's say that again. COVID-19 has not been proven to be contagious. So
it's assumed that it is.
It's assumed.
because
It sounds like it.
and you
Looks
look
like
at
it.
Who are the people who are dying?
It's a message coming from everybody else.
Over 90% comorbidity people. Now, where are these comorbidity people stuffed into nursing homes? Are they poisoned? What kind of food do they have?
Oh, of course.
What kind of emotional contact do they have?
Sure, and that's sad.
And they have heart disease. They're on statins. They're on cardiovascular drugs.
High blood pressure
They're on
drugs,
diabetes drugs.
ACE2 inhibitors.
Absolutely.
They get
Their
the virus
bodies
shot.
are
They're
poisoned.
forced to give the virus shot every single year. They're poisoned, and they cannot take the excretion, the detox, the exosome saying, we got to clean up each and every cell. We just
And
have to.
why are children essentially
Can't do it.
immortal to this?
And on our live Q&A, because they're
Because
strong.
they have strong detoxification systems.
Yeah, on our live Q&A webinar we did last week, which everybody should sign up for because we try to stump the doctor right here. But we showed a picture of these kids right here in Utah, in Provo, Utah, their first day of school. They're each one on top of their desks are in plexiglass cages and masks.
I don't know what else to call it. Cages.
I mean, if the masks work, they don't need plexiglass. If the plexiglass work, they don't need masks. I mean.
No. Say that again.
I think you heard me. This is abuse. This is child abuse. They can't touch each other. They can't run around and hold each other's hand and play in the dirt. And of course, it's going to get in them anyway. It's so ridiculous. It's just a power struggle.
I want to quote Zach Bush here as we finish.
Okay.
Because the question is, can we stop the biome?
Yeah, can we stop it by locking ourselves down, hiding, and wearing masks?
There are more viruses floating around right now in the room of this house where we're broadcasting this podcast than there are stars in the heavens. Not only can we not stop it, we wouldn't want to. That's my position. The adaptation speed of the planet is determined by airflow. Genomic information didn't wait for humans to show up. Viruses have been transiting our globe since long before humans. In fact, without this virus parade of genetic material information mixing with the milieu of life and informing life over billions of years, we would not have shown up, because we know that viruses travel rapidly around the planet without human travel, without airplanes.
Yeah, and I like what he said here. We would not have even shown up if we have not had this viral information transitioning what's the word?
Transitioning around the planet.
Yeah. Not transitioning, but literally moving around the planet.
Yep. Transitioning from this space to this space to this country to this mountain to this
and informing
ocean.
Other life, other humans, other animals.
Of genomic upgrades.
And a genomic upgrade.
What an incredibly fascinating concept. And it started this cascade of information with Dr. Virgin lecturing to the NIH in 2015. And that concept of virology is starting to explode. Virologists who are not allowed on the evening news, who are not approved by Fauci, who are not a part of the coronavirus task force, that are being banned from YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and other places, are coming out with their papers saying, wait a minute. We might have this completely wrong. These things are for our betterment and our life. They're messages. Now listen to the message instead of killing the messenger.
This is the forbidden information you only get here, but that's not really true. We got a lot of our information from Dr. Thomas Cowan, from Zach Bush, from Dr. McBride. We want to end this podcast with a quote that you can find at the beginning of Dr. Thomas Cowan's book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, which I recommend for everybody. He quoted from Victor Schauberger, "People may say I'm crazy. Perhaps they are right. In this case, it's not so important that there is one fool or more or less in the world. But in case I am right and science is wrong, Lord, have mercy on mankind."
Yeah.
That's a little dramatic to not have to wear a mask, but...
Well, we are leaving on an airplane very shortly, and we will be wearing masks or we're not allowed to fly. So I'll just wear my mask and rebreathe my carbon dioxide.
And as my sister says, it will make other people that are frightened less frightened, and that's important. That's very important. So I will just keep thinking that in my head. So, and even if you've done it before, don't forget to do our free symptom survey we offer at forbiddendoctor.com. It's a comprehensive survey to which you will get a very personalized protocol. It's not really a survey. It's kind of a health questionnaire.
Yeah.
We should probably change that
It's
verbiage.
instructional, too. You can't take it without learning something.
Yeah. It's very easy to fill out. You just click the symptoms, and at the bottom of the survey, you can write in anything more you'd like us to know. And then afterwards, you get the opportunity to have a free 30-minute phone call or phone consultation with our nutritionist. You don't have to do that consultation, but it's free, so why not? And how'd you like to have a free consultation for 30 minutes where you don't even have to leave the comforts of your home?
Yeah, that's my idea.
Telemedicine. So understand this survey saves you money in the long run because you're not taking supplements you don't need. All of this at no charge to you. And if you decide to purchase the recommended supplements, you can get the first order for a 10% discount if you sign up for our weekly text blasts. And these text blasts give you fantastic coupons every single week. We just had one for Labor Day.
Yep.
It was great. Just text the word healthy to 41411. So you write 41411 where you write the telephone number and then you type text healthy, and we'll send you back a coupon code which you can use on our website when you check out. And if you want 20% off all the time, join our VIP membership. Just go to forbiddendoctor.com/VIP and let's start your healing process today.
So the statements made in this podcast about specific products have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration and probably never will be, and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided or any information contained on or in any product label or packaging or this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional.
Thank you for listening to this Forbidden Information and our Forbidden podcast, and join us next time for another in-depth discussion of forbidden knowledge.
Yeah, I think we'll say goodbye to COVID for a while.
Yeah, okay.
At least until the vaccines show up.
We'll see you
We'll see you then.
next week.